for the most part, there's really a huge amount of scientists and people in academia and engineering and in all kinds of areas, right, that kind of got their start, watching Star Trek and Star Wars and the X-Files and, all these kind of science fiction shows, right? And all of that, gets wrapped up into the hunt for these real-life stories, right? And so, they're really, it's fascinating to think how much of our technology has been shaped by these science fiction, otherworldly sort of claims, right? But I think it is a hugely. That's why I think it's such an interesting time right now for the UFO field. Is that there are so many young, scientists, so many young engineers, so many just young, thoughtful people who, again, grew up with these stories and for whom the idea of extraterrestrial life, or whatever that may mean, whatever these craft are, that idea is not a foreign one to them. It's something that we all grew up with. So I think it's interesting.
I'll never forget one of the first media appearances that I did after starting this show was myself. I wish Matt Moniz was here, my usual co-host. He's a chemist himself, and he's worked with MUFON for years, and he's been researching UFOs for 25 years. He works with abductees. You guys would have had a great conversation, but he's actually not able to make it in tonight. But one of the first things that we ever did kind of to go out and promote this show was we were asked to do a cable access program here in the town of where the radio show broadcasts from, Fairhaven, Massachusetts. And the name of the show was The Rational Individualist. And the host, I believe his name was Steve Grossman, he wanted to have us come on and talk about all this stuff. And then, of course, he totally sandbagged us as soon as we started rolling the cameras and went after us and basically try to dissect everything that we do and tell us that we're stupid for doing it. And so the first question that he asked Matt Moniz is, Matt, if you're a scientist, what are you doing researching the paranormal? And Matt looked at him and said, my job. And that always kind of stuck with me that, it's just because things, just because things haven't been proven or haven't been fully explained, it doesn't mean that they can be easily dismissed.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting areas where I always say this to people too, where if I was couching this conversation in futurism, right? So the kind of stuff that I did talk about in my thesis and in my kind of time in philosophy as well, where it was, okay, well, let's imagine a society that is 200 years in the future. What do we think justice means for that society? What do we mean economics? What do we think economics will change to? How will interplanetary travel alter our politics and our sociology and the view of us as a species, right? Those questions, when you talk about them from kind of if you talk about them from the armchair of a philosophy professor, they're viewed seriously and very usefully, right? They're viewed as being interesting, good questions. But the minute you kind of put on, I guess, a kind of amateur academic or just kind of enthusiast view, or if you say but I'm actually thinking, like, what if this stuff's really happening? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the part where people are like, whoa, it changes, right? And so that's kind of part of where we're hoping to go with things. Is a lot of these questions are useful outside of the scope of whether or not these things exist, right? Or even whether or not they are physical craft, or they are just part of a anthropological question of, for since recorded history, at least as far as we know, people have reported some kind of experience where they are taken out of their bed at night, and whether or not that's just folklore or it's a kind of, I don't know, a part of our collective consciousness or something, or if it's really happening, that has been reported, right? And I mean, probably the most interesting distinction between the two, kind of modern day view and the past view, for me, growing up in New York and then living in Boston and New England for so long, was witchcraft, right? There are these stories of witches who come into the bedroom at night and take people out for the Black Sabbath, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even people on the ground who claimed to see them flying people away. But there was really no evidence for any of that, right? It was all this kind of, I guess, superstitious idea or something. But the fact that that is so similar to abduction cases, again, whether or not the cases themselves are actually occurring, that is an interesting question for someone who is seriously academically interested in the subject to investigate. And so that's kind of the way that I want to look at things more, where we're looking for the truth. We're looking for, I desperately want to find that case that convinces me that UFOs are out there, right? But I think there are interesting and useful ways for us to talk about this that kind of bridges some of that gap and brings what I would say is sort of an academic a weight to the topic, right? And a kind of a background and couches it in a academic tradition.
And so that's what you pitched to MUFON as being a new direction to take the research. And how was that received by them?
So what I pitched to MUFON was kind of opening up what we consider to be useful investigation, or what we consider to be useful research, right? So a big part of that is changing the way that we view UFO cases, right? So, for instance, right now, the way that we look at UFO cases is basically as individual events, right? So kind of like, I would liken it almost to the way that we used to do police work in kind of the 1800s to the transition with centralized large law enforcement organizations, right? So previously it was individual police departments tracking the criminals in their community and looking at these crimes as individual events. But eventually we found out that, well, actually, there's a lot of usefulness in providing statistics to these cases and doing analysis of criminology and the way that criminals think, and also useful things on the outskirts of that major study, such as the anthropology of crime or the sociology of crime or the economic driving forces for it or the psychology of a criminal. All of those things are adjacent to criminology, but not necessarily what one would consider to be criminology as such. What I basically proposed to MUFON was we do the same thing for the study of UFO cases. We, of course, continue to investigate and look at these individual cases, but we need to start applying different lenses to the statistical data, to the overarching themes that we see, and we need to start basically looking at – we basically need to start treating the study of UFOs like we do any other primarily human-related study. Right? So just like you would study sociology, that's kind of a lot of the same tools that I would hope to start using for the UFO field. And then on top of that, bringing in people with serious scientific credentials and using those people that already exist within MUFON to actually study the data that we have, right? Because, I mean, even if we think that 100% we believe that UFOs are real. And I personally do believe that. I believe that there is something to these cases. Even if you think that's true, 1 out of every 100 of those cases might be a real one, but 99% of them are going to be misidentified, or there's just not going to be enough info to do any kind of further study, or you're going to get your 1 or 2 hoaxes out of 100, right? And within that 1 out of 100, maybe 1 out of 1,000 will have physical evidence, right? Some kind of mark on the body or, singed trees or even a landing spot or something, right? So really, if we want to do something useful with this data that we collect, and we do collect a lot of it every year, we need to stop focusing so much on those few cases that have, I guess, what one would maybe term forensic evidence, right? Things like these physical pieces of evidence, and start looking at these data trends and this, looking at this with a wider scope. So that's part of what I proposed to MUFON. The other part was being more critical of basically making MUFON be something of a gatekeeper to what is considered to be good practice or good, kind of the thing that I always go back to when people ask me this is if everything is evidence of UFOs, then nothing is, right? If everything is evidence of extraterrestrial contact of some sort, then we start losing the forest for the trees, right? It just becomes there's too much, and we start allowing in so much possible theorizing and information that you can't get through it, right? And so what I proposed was creating basically what amounts to an internal review board and an external review board where MUFON investigates these cases and looks for trends in the data and looks at the big proposals out there about what UFOs are, what these theories are that are out there, and basically provide to the public and our members a view on what that data is and what basically our experts who have been doing this for 30 years, 40 years, some of them, what their take on it is. So trying to provide a service as something like a peer review board or something like that for the UFO community so that we don't keep treading the same water over and over again.
And one of the things that can happen with, especially, when you liken this to criminology, one of the things that can happen in that field is that as you are building these case studies and looking at the forest for the trees and seeing commonalities and seeing patterns, you can almost predictively identify certain traits. And, that's why we can say, this person fits the profile of somebody who's going to be a criminal. And there is a lot of a movement toward that. Do you think we could ever get to the point where it's predictive of who could be the type of person that might have an abduction scenario? Or, is this some of the certain factors or certain locations that might be a spot where a UFO sighting or landing could occur? Is there a way to kind of use this information to predictively know where these incidents are going to happen so that we can actually get ahead of them so that we're catching them as they happen instead of chronicling them after the fact?
Sure. Well, so frankly, I don't know yet, right? We don't have the data yet. We have the data, but no one's analyzed it yet.
Right.
What I would say, though, is that I think, so that actually kind of gets to the heart of one of the more interesting questions that is out there right now, raging in this field, right? That is, are UFOs even a physical thing, right? Right? Is there any reason, as far as we can tell, to what happens, right, with this event or with these cases? You kind of get into that with the Skinwalker Ranch type stuff, where are these, some of these instances just seem like things that are just getting weird for no apparent reason, right? The high strangeness of it all might suggest that there really is no way for us to even comprehend what the underlying theme or idea is. However, I would hope that there are trends that we can at least see. It really comes down to, if you think that UFO cases are the result of some higher intelligence or other intelligence out there visiting this planet, then potentially we can find evidence to support that in the totality of the cases, right? And that's kind of what the hope, I think, for a lot of people has been from shows like the X-Files and these other kind of paranormal type UFO-focused series where, what people really want is us to look at all this data and see, okay, I don't know, predominantly women in the age bracket of like 20 to 35 are being abducted. They all have this color hair and this color eyes, and they're all this descent, right? This kind of ethnicity. And so clearly there is some kind of genetic testing going on or something, right? Or they want us to find, okay, well, it's always people that are in families that have abductions and all this other stuff. And maybe that's going to be the case when we actually go through the data and look. What I would say, though, is that then actually using that to then jump to a conclusion about what the ultimate goal is, that gets you really close to kind of the problem of, correlation does not suggest causation, right? Just because there's a correlation here where, okay, I don't know, I'm just making these numbers up. I have not, we don't have this data yet in front of me or anything. But let's say that we find out that, 90% of the people that have a sighting are living in 30 of the United States, right? Then that might make a suggestion for where we should send our investigators. But we can't then say that is because they're, looking for a specific sort of person or someone who, lives near a cornfield or something, right? There's not enough info out there, I think, to make those kind of correlations. So in terms of being predictive, I don't know. I hope, though, that it will at least be descriptive, so we can at least use it to do sort of an analysis of if a case comes in, do we think it is a valid case?